All right, it is 5:31. We're going to go ahead and get started. We heard from one person or two that we couldn't make it this evening, and we'll watch a recording, and other people proceed to join us. They will. As we get through this, I have a couple housekeeping items for the hybrid meeting. This meeting is being recorded and broadcast on the city's YouTube channel. Please remember to, it's not being broadcast, it's recorded. This one is posted 24 to 48 hours after the meeting. People could register for the Zoom to participate in the live meeting if they chose to do so. Well, remember to mute yourself when you're not speaking, and the chat function for this meeting is disabled, and all chats will directly go to me as the host, unless you're participating, which all of you, if there was other people not membership, turn their video off and allows the active meeting participants to be seen on screen, which you all are. We reserve the right to mute people or turn off individual videos to minimize distraction. And now we will go ahead and take an opportunity. I'm going to go quickly through introductions because for our first item on the agenda this evening, we have with us Mark Warner, our consultant from Warner Transportation Consulting, and he's going to share some work with you. But I would like, if you could introduce yourself and who you represent on the committee, I think that would be helpful for him to understand who's in the room and who he's presenting to. We'll let Pat, Dot, and David online go in that order, if that's okay, and then we'll do everybody in the room.
Sure. Hi, I'm Pat Collette, and I'm representing the Multimodal Transportation Commission.
Hi, I'm Dot Neri, and I'm representing Live Well, Douglas County.
And I am David Carter. I'm a city appointee on the Lawrence Douglas County Metropolitan Planning Commission.
I'm Charlie Thomas on the Planning Commission, a county appointee.
Ed Jankowski, I represent the city of Eudora.
So that's who we have with us this evening. Mark, before we get to that item on the agenda, we have meeting notes where we have posted meeting notes from the November 15th meeting for your information. And then we'll get right into our travel demand model, which we anxiously planned. If you had a chance to look at this before today, you probably saw a PowerPoint. Mark's going to present something that we have updated today based on our continued evolution of our travel demand modeling process. Mark, would you like me to share a screen or would you like to share a screen?
Well, I can bring it up here. So, I guess that works.
Yeah, you can introduce this, and this topic, travel demand modeling, is part of our federally required process for our travel demand or for our transportation plan update. And so we brought on Mark to do the technical work of this. It exceeds some of the capacity we have at our MPO to do. And so Mark has been busy working with us over the last few months, and we'll continue to until we get this project done. So I'll let him take it away, and I believe he's got a lot to present. And if you have, stop him anytime if you have questions, raise your hand, and we'll make sure that he sees that so we can get any of your questions you have answered as we go through this.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Jessica. Share. Okay, I see how that works. Okay, now full screen, slideshow, full screen. Home, hang on, just let me get this up to the full screen. I take it view, full screen, full screen. Haven't done this in a while here. Let's see, how do we get the full screen up there? Maybe I should have left it to you.
I know, if you go all the way to the bottom down by the percent bar, the little icon that looks like a screen next to the plus or minus bar on the right.
Oh, look at that. Okay, am I not showing the screen yet?
The full right icon is a presentation icon.
You're not, you don't see the PowerPoint?
No, we see the PowerPoint. I'm telling you how to get to it in presentation mode is the icon on the far bottom right next to the plus or minus bar on your screen.
Yeah, it's just to the left of the minus sign at the bottom.
Left to the left of the minus sign. There's no minus sign or plus sign. I should know how to do this. I've done this so many times. Let's see. Slideshow? Really? There's no.
From here. Do it from here.
Well, what do you think about that? Home. Let's go back here now. Insert view. Slideshow. Why is the slideshow? From beginning. Here we go.
There we go.
Okay, there we go. Okay, all right. So Jessica described this as being, this is a travel demand model, and the travel demand models work. They break down systematically all of the travel processes by individuals in a metropolitan area as a way of replicating the existing flows to match the existing counts. And once we have a fair match to those counts, then we can use those parameters and formulas in place to then apply it to the roadway in the future and the land use in the future, the population, the jobs, the University of Kansas enrollment, and all of the other elements, where those activities are going to be. Now, what I mean by breaking it down systematically, it asks questions like, well, why are people traveling? What purposes? Are they doing it as part of their commute to get to school? Are they recreational purposes, going to shop or visit friends or medical? And then where would they begin their trips? Usually at their homes, but sometimes their college dormitories. There are hotel rooms in here as well. And sometimes you'll have trips that start from businesses. Truck trips, for example, would be in there. There are also trips that are just passing through the region, coming in on one side of I-70, going out on US 59 on the other side of Douglas County or in K10. So those are through travel, which is going to be represented here as well. Where are these trips headed? Well, they're going from their homes, going either to their work sites, stores and restaurants, medical facilities, over to KU or Haskell or Baker University, or other activity centers. And then what mode would they take? This is an update of a model that Lawrence Douglas County had in 2015. It now also has a mode choice. Pat, I see that you're the multimodal person in here. Well, this model now does have a multimodal feature. So it does introduce, it no longer looks at just vehicle trips, but actual person trips, and then divides those trips by those going by automobile or with various vehicle occupancy rates, or by foot or by bicycle or by transit. So the full transit network is in here. And the model is also able to go and look at the changing transit network. Lawrence Transit System is going to be introducing a new hub system, some new route alignments, and you can use the model to go and test that. I've already done that. And so then it's also how would motorists go and determine what route they would take for the vast majority of trips that are not immediately in walking distance. There is people are going to be taking it in their car, but then are they going to be going on 23rd Street or 19th? Are they going to go on to, K10 or what road would they be taking through town in Iowa? And this is something which is a function of the speeds, the free flow speeds, as well as the level of congestion on the different roads. As more vehicles get on the roads, it adds to congestion, which slows down the speed. And so then people will go and know that after a while, and they'll break it down to go to a different route. The model uses 24 different hourly assignments. So it breaks all that down. And we know from experiences elsewhere, what is the distribution of trips from home to school or to work, and then going back to them later on. So it's very methodical, it's systematic, and it really is the best type of tool for being able to account for transportation system changes. So that's an overview. The model does take into account that the roadway structure, population, employment, lodging, college enrollment, the full highway network. And then there's a series of feedback loops to make sure that it is something that finally comes and settles down. So I'm open for any questions if you have it along the way, but let me just describe a little bit more about what this particular model is doing. The calibration is to pre-COVID conditions with the hope that, Lawrence, Kansas and Douglas County and everywhere else will return to post-COVID conditions eventually, and that will be the one that you want to go and replicate. So it looks at the full year 2019. The model is a weekday model, so it's looking primarily at just those travel factors, and that's what is based on the average daily traffic. As I mentioned, it is an hourly forecast that can be aggregated up to the daily numbers. And it looks at traffic volumes. It's able to work with traffic volumes to replicate that, to look at volume capacity ratios for different roads. And the select link analysis just refers to being able to see, okay, on this road, where in fact are traffic, where are vehicles or individuals coming from and where are they going? The one thing I forgot to mention too is that it breaks down the region into essentially small neighborhoods, transportation analysis zones. So within really the more settled, urbanized, denser parts of the city of Lawrence, they'll be very tiny, 1 block within the downtown. And then it gets bigger as you get into different neighborhoods where the relative land uses are very similar, or out into the county. There'll be higher density as well for Baldwin City and for Eudora and the Compton. The model is also sensitive to all these different transportation system changes. And the idea is that once you've got a model that's able to go and match the base year, the 2019 conditions, then you can apply those formulas to whatever you throw at it in the future. So this is where you can put in a new transit system, you can widen the road, you can put in a center turn lane, and you can change the population, you can change the different types of employment, where they're going to be. Healthcare, it's all broken down by sort of functional activity of that work site, or whatever the work site is. And you've got that, and it's set up in a way which allows for ease of use. The model is consistent with industry standards and with professional integrity. And this is what you want to do. There are various characteristics that define whether the model does go and meet all these things, but that is how this model has been designed. So it is appropriate for a small metropolitan area, a medium-sized metropolitan area, such as Douglas County. And it uses appropriate parameters or local data wherever that was available. The model breaks the region down into these 442 transportation analysis zones, and then there are additional spots around the perimeter, which is where the roads come into the county that would be for through traffic, and for people who are living in Lawrence and going to be working out at the Panasonic site, or going down into Overland Park or Topeka. So you have all of these where people can go in and out, and the model does capture all of these effects. I've been working with David Chronister at Kansas DOT, wherever there were some things outside the model. One of the particular things is, David, what's Kansas DOT estimating for through traffic on I-70 in 2050? That's outside the model's parameters, but it is something that affects travel flow here. So this is something that the parameters here are consistent with what he's got too. In setting up the population, it looks at population characteristics at the block level from the census. There were some issues with the city of Lawrence where they questioned whether the 2020 census was in fact a fair count. It was during COVID. There are a lot of people who were attending KU. So was it fair? Their conclusion, and the Census Department, the Census Bureau has not refuted it, is that it was not. So that has been the basis that I've used, were the numbers that they used for 2019, with the city of Lawrence's estimates. And then there were some adjustments elsewhere, mostly on the employment side. A lot of times you have cases where all the employment for a city is at City Hall or at the school department office, rather than at the individual schools or work sites. KU had this, all of their employment was at one spot, which actually wasn't even at KU, according to quarterly workforce indicators. So it had to be moved back to the actual locations of those buildings. So adjustments, I mentioned here, adjustments for KU. There were other issues too. You have a couple of Walmarts in Lawrence. They weren't split properly in terms of those breakout. And the LPS's Lawrence Public Schools, as I mentioned, breaking those out. So this is the 7 trip purposes. Again, the whole idea of this is that you break it down. You're looking at 130,000 people within a county, 118,000 now, and going up. But where are they going to go? Trying to understand the travel flows of all of those people plus the through traffic. It would be, it seems like an impossible way to go and identify and replicate all of those individual decision makers. This is the thing, you keep on breaking it down, and you use local data and known estimates of travel patterns, the number of trips people take, the trip length distribution, the intervening opportunities, and you come up with all these different pieces. This is an example of the types of trips that the model replicates distinctly. You can see those. And this is, I'll show you this. This is where looking at the validation, the red is predicted by the model, the green is the observed count. And if we look at it, so this is the full Douglas County here. And if we look at it, so what you want is you want to see these the red bars are a good replicant, are able to adequately represent or replicate the green observed counts. So, and this is looking at it within K10, the city of Lawrence. And if we look at this, the observed versus predicted volumes here, this is the Federal Highway Administration has a guideline there where these should match, the predicted should match the observed at this is an R squared of 0.88. Here it's a 0.913, which is closer to 1, which would be a perfect match. So again, these are things where you'll be, it's one thing, it's funny too, because I was just looking at this, speaking with this Jessica and Kyle today. There were a couple of things where I couldn't figure out why are some roads higher? And this is, if you can see here, you can see my cursor. This is Fambro that goes around. The stadium is over here. This is Jayhawk and the little service road right here. Not the service road, but a lot of parking on this road. But the model is also able to replicate that Jayhawk is closed, everything but buses from 8 a.m. till 5. So that's in the model as well. But this one, I kept getting more traffic. And it was only today when I looked at finally, I haven't made a trip out to Lawrence yet, but when I finally went and looked at the topographic map and I saw, this is a great big hill going up here. That's why you have fewer cars going on that road. And the model, I didn't capture that. The earlier model didn't capture that either, but it does do area factors where you pick up the central business district, you pick up the level of issues of traffic lights and the density and cars parked on the side. But what should be in here, which I didn't realize was essential because I was using my stereotype of flat Kansas, was that you got some serious hills here and that is affecting your travel flow. So in the next iteration, the next time you see this, I will go back and I will account for that, put in those factors. And I think that was the factor I was missing because the model kept saying, no, this is where this traffic will go. No, it doesn't. Observers predicted. And this is where it looks at breaking out functional class. These targets are general goals that Federal Highway Administration likes to see for these types of models. So plus or minus 7% for the interstate or 7% for other highways in the region. This is all getting that. Major arterials. Again, this is plus or minus. So for the totals here too. And these are all within those. Overall, for the 205 counts, I think is what it is. The model is within 1% of the predicted, of the observed. 202 counts right there. And this is a root mean squared error, which is another way of looking at the individual error. I'm just presenting these as a way of providing some evidence that the model does calibrate well, that it is consistent with industry standards for this. And again, it is done with a particular care of making sure that these different pieces are picked up here. But this is the thing, you can take these 130,000 individual decision makers and you can run these models and it's kind of a miracle sometimes, but they work very well. So these are things which is another indication of that. These are other functions. These are local roads, which are harder to go and account for adequately, with real precision, and Federal Highway Administration understands that. So looking at so that was really where once we have an adequate current year model, we then can use those formulas and we change some of the characteristics of the transportation network or of the land use, and then say, what is the effect? So these are some of the future transportation changes that are part of the county's committed projects right now, looking out to 2050. The long-range transportation plan typically looks out to 25 years. So the next one would be looking out to 2050. Or 25 to 30 years. And so this is now the interchange at K10 and I-70 changes. A big change is looking at widening and dividing K10 around. So his piece here, this is all currently single lane in each direction up to US 59. And then, small things like center turn lane. There's an additional center turn lane on US 56 by Baldwin City. This whole setup here And these roads out here would be new as well. So, and then use also the interchange out here, this changes as well to where you're crossing, what was it, 1400 road over here to the connection over here. And I think those were the key changes. Okay, so here actually, this is looking also as well. This is the coding of this. The interchange at Wakarusa, this connects onto existing roads, but this old interchange, which doesn't really show up here, is removed. The divided highway, US 40 and K10, the new entrance from the highway, and then there's a new entrance going from the southbound lanes and back onto it. And that this road would now extend down to North 1200 Road. So this is looking also at the forecast for population and employment. I mentioned again that we started not with the census data from 2020 or the American Community Survey estimates for 2019, but really with the adjusted numbers for the city of Lawrence that they had. Their number was 102,980. And you can break that down: population, households, students in dormitories, other group quarters, and total. This is occupied households. So you have some vacant households as well, but this is the number of the city of Lawrence is using. And then this is looking out to the county as well. So no, that's City of Lawrence going out to 2050. This is the county over here. So this includes all of these. So for a total population of 127,000 in 2019. So this is Woods and Pool was the basis for the future forecast of population. This is essentially, it's actually a modified Woods and Pool because it also works with the new base for the city of Lawrence and what was in there for the county, how that affects the county as well. But Woods and Pool essentially works from, the full United States, and then says, based on the population characteristics in terms of people who are currently age 5, and what is the mortality rate, and age 6 and age 7 going up to age 100, what is the mortality rate for each of those people? And it breaks it down by part of the country, by ethnicity. So it has an understanding from actuarial tables of who's likely to be alive, what are the number of people who are being born, with recognizing all of these demographic differences. And then you have in-migration, out-migration. So you come up with a national total, and then that gets divided by the state and ultimately down to each individual county. So Woods and Pool is a reliable source. It's been around for a long time. It's a good it's a good estimate there too. There we're looking at an increase of about 30,000 people for the county as a whole between 2019 and 2050. So then I applied that number for the population, and then had to make some other assumptions about, well, what does KU say is going to be their dormitories, during that time out to the future. And then they also have an economic breakout. And so that was also working with that and working backwards back to individual to the city of Lawrence. And each one of those other translation analysis zones was a way of providing the background information. So this is the distribution. Again, this is one scenario, and this is looking at the change in population. So you see the outside, and this was also looking too at some of the information that was available. Let's see, I know that there was, for instance, in Eudora, you had that Star Bond project, which is right over here, what the proposed growth was going to be over here. And then in the city of Lawrence, this would be new annexed area, recognizing what is going to be the utility expansion, what's available in terms of some vacant land, where are current uses, what seems to be a growth range. But this is really one of the questions I suppose for this group, and the beginning of the process there too. This is one scenario. Again, the model can test any other scenario. So if you have a sense that there's going to be densification, a higher building allowance within the city of Lawrence, then some of that expected population growth that would be on the west side of K10 would now be within the more central area. So this is the same thing, just looking at it. That should be city of Lawrence.
And Mark, if I can interrupt you real quick. So
Yeah,
this
sure.
is generally, historically, has always been prepared within those traffic analysis zones, that these projections are done in partnership with our planning office. And so Jeff Crick and planning staff, as you know, planning director, are involved in the development of these projections based on growth tiers in Plan 2040. Also recognizing that this year, which goes out to 2050, extends beyond just the planned growth, you know, primarily within tier 2, but into tier 3, since it goes out another decade past that. And so this, we got some questions from Multimodal Transportation Commission when we shared this with them, and I think it's a good question. And I just want to point it out that this is based on the current assumptions we have about land use planning. We recognize there's ongoing conversations with land development code update about densification and what does that look like. And so as Mark was talking about, this is kind of that remaining question about is there another scenario we want to look at in terms of impacts if it didn't happen in that western area, and if instead it happened within the current kind of limits of K10. And so we don't have all of that tonight, but as we finish up this conversation, you'll kind of see Mark is in the process of working on some of that based on what we believe is going to be conversation that steering committee for the land development code update. They have a meeting on Thursday. And so you can see we're kind of working their schedules behind ours, you know, in terms of if we would have had all that first, we would have made some of those assumptions maybe differently as we've been working on this over the last month. But we still have a very small amount of time where I think we can be able to pull that off and be able to show that as a reality of the to add to the conversation.
Right. Well, that's a good point. Okay, thanks, Jessica. And this is looking at the expected change of employment from, you know, going out to 2050 as well, again, from the base year of 2019. So basic would be manufacturing, utility work, warehousing, and mining and farming within the county, really. So that would be part of that. And this is really just showing that sort of more central, more settled part of the county. And red is the retail, the orange is the healthcare, and the education, broke education, non-college and college are divided out there. And then the other, that's a lot of public employment. So that's also would be research work, or other services that would be part of that. So this shows where, again, one scenario, there may be opportunities to go and refine that or test some others.
So again, this is based on the planned commercial and industrial locations in Plan 2040, as well as known proposals for development. So you can see the recent KU conversations are shown in here. Mark, if you go to the next slide and look at the county, a lot of the things related to the proposals for Eudora are shown there in terms of the projected increase in employment for those areas.
Right. So that can, again, there's room to change. Oops, change in population. Okay, that's a double. But anyway, when you take all of these, this is really gets to the point of the model. So all of those land use changes that were evident in those earlier slides, and the transportation changes. Oh, wait, this is looking at, wait a minute, what does it say up at the top? I got to move all of you. Hang on.
4 to 5. Yeah.
Oh, this is 2050. Wait a minute, 2050 flow with no road
There you
change. Well, let's start with this one. So this is looking at base year 8 to 9. Hang on, what happened? If no road changes, 153. Did I pull up the right one? 153 and 156. 156, yeah, that's the one with committed projects. And let me just go through here. Yeah, 155, 156. On current roads, on committed roads. Yeah, okay. Let me just see, base year flow. Okay, so this is where, again, as I mentioned, that the model can show, looks at each individual hour This is where I just took 4 to 5 p.m., which is typically the most congested hour, the busiest hour in a metropolitan area. And this is looking at the level of service. So those things that move closer to red are worse conditions. This yellow is already level of service D. Level of service is a sort of a measure of the level of congestion, or the sort of the degree to which individual cars affect the overall flow. When the level of service A means it's essentially free flow conditions. You're the only person on the road, or nobody else is really interfering with you going whatever speed you want. And as you get towards level of service F, it's bumper to bumper. Nobody's going anywhere. So typically there's not a great deal of traffic congestion in Douglas County, but this is one where, well, based on the model, this is where it's coming up there at 4 p.m. So there would be some crowding there. There are a couple of things where they may still need to get a little bit of fine tuning. I'm in earlier conversation with Kyle and Jessica this morning or this afternoon. I noticed that the ramp I have here, this is between 23rd Street and K10. I think I've got the wrong functional classification for that. So I have to go and make some changes to that. But this is just another way of where the model is right now. And then this is with those committed projects. So you can see where things change. This actually gets better because here's where the state has widened, put on a second lane in each direction on K10 and divided it. This interchange, and you can see these new roads down here are coming in as well. This is now a different, the interchange changes up here, whoops. And right now, Kansas DOT is forecasting a large increase in through traffic coming from the west on I-70, going out to the east on I-70 and to the east on K10. So that traffic that comes down here would be coming out in here, going down here and out this way. A little smaller share goes down US 59. But if it's also suggesting here that, well, these roads, they would be a free tolling system going out into the future, but it would still, the model is suggesting that, look, this one lane ramp is not going to be enough. The Kansas DOT, while they're considering whether they're planning to make their construction, perhaps they are, I will check with David Cronster about this, but or somebody else at KDOT. The amount of traffic you have flowing through here at 4 to 5 p.m. is going to be, you're going to have serious congestion. So this is, again, looking back here, because of a great deal of growth, that additional 30,000 people in the region and where the expectation was of the development, it is adding to worsening conditions, but not wildly serious, not where the whole city lights up. And this is another instance too. However, if you hadn't made any of those committed projects, well, then it would be a mess. So K10 in particular would not be would be failing. This also is, this schematic map is only showing the larger roads, the collectors and arterials and highways, and a few local roads that function really as serving more than just an individual neighborhood. But where this traffic comes here, this is because this is still listed. You're having so much growth here on the western side of K10 that if that were to develop, you're having problems coming across at Wakarusa and coming across here at West 6th Street in particular. That's one with no, if you didn't put in those particular changes. And this is looking, that was 4 to 5. This is now in the morning. And you can see some of it here. You can see this one, the traffic 4 to 5, it was going eastbound. And now it's in the morning, it's more going westbound this way into Lawrence. So it's not as bad as 8 to 9. This is with the changes. And if you didn't widen K10, yeah, this would be a problem. And again, this equilibrates. So even this doesn't mean that all the traffic that was scheduled to go on K10 from I-70 going out to Johnson County would necessarily take take this route, wouldn't necessarily take K10. A lot of this traffic, recognizing this heavy congestion slowing down, will go different routes. They'll equilibrate. It will go out here, will go down McDonald or getting off in downtown. So, and before going out to the rest of the county. So it does recognize that. Looking at level of service, this small red spot here has to do with, this is Barker and 19th, I think, right here. There's a traffic rotary here that, according to this, it picks up, that's a little bit of, according to this, has some problems. This over here is right by, this is the extension of Bob Billings. And this is where you do have, it deliberately goes and lowers a lane right into the campus. So this is showing, by the way, the size of the pie represents the hours over the course of the day at level of service D, E, or F. So the yellow is level of service D, the orange is level of service E, and a little bit of red here is level of service F. But that would be just for 1 hour is what that's showing here. And this is with the committed roads. Again, you have an increase in population of 30,000 people. So it's a worsening situation. This, by the way, this big circle here is not K10. This is actually on 1400 Road. This is out to the west of it. This is because you have all this development here, but it's still, there wasn't any committed change, but I suspect it will be as part of that intersection change. It's right now, it's just a gravel county road. And with all the projected development, it is going to have to take some increase in traffic capacity, or else it will just, you don't have enough crossings of K10. And so that particular spot is what that's showing that's not on K10. This is highlighting that need for a widened ramp. This is not on I-70, it's the ramp with the route, with the new design. And then you have some changes here, at McDonald. This is, again, that same spot in the center of the county. This will have to check the ramp on that, but those are where, and this is, again, if you had all that 2050 population, all of the land use, but you didn't make any changes to the current roads, it's, that's where, so this is where it is. That's where the expectation with the committed plans, and this is where you're starting to see, K10 continues to be a worsening problem. Oh, this is just the transit flow here. So this is now with the, I think this was with, it doesn't show in the key here, but I think this is a 2050 plan looking at the 2023. So the 2023, this is taking the transit service as proposed now by Lawrence Transit System, where this, putting, realigning certain routes, changing the little bit of the hub and orientation. And this is looking at it, just the thickness here indicates, the flow over the course of a day. So.
The sensor went off.
Moving it up.
Yeah, so transit is allowed here on Jayhawk throughout the day too. So this is, like I said, just as next steps. I will be producing a full methodology report and a user's guide. And again, this is an iterative process, working with, as I'll be able to set up any scenario here and to test alternatives. If the densification is one, other types of transportation improvements that you may be suggesting, and then where those would go. If you say, well, maybe this is going to have, if you make it denser within the city, there's going to be less activity out in the west side of K10. So how that would work out there. Maybe Eudora is going to imagine that they will get more of the development of more of the housing as Sunflower expands, that gets redeveloped with the Panasonic. So you can make certain tests there too, but it would still be within those control totals of, whatever, 152,000 people for Douglas County. So that's, let me see, let me prove that here. Oh, ongoing model runs and support after that too, but that's it. So let me go back here. So am I back? So that gives an indication of it. And if you have any questions about the modeling process or the types of parameters that would be important for establishing what would be a future land use, or highlighting where some changes might be needed in the transportation system. I'll try and answer your questions, but that's how it works.
He mentioned that the took into account the STAR
Yes.
development there in Eudora and the development that's going to happen here in Lawrence. Has anybody taken a stab at trying to plug into this what impact the Panasonic plant is going to have on this?
Yes, so those assumptions in the both employment and also in the housing take into account the zones, those traffic analysis zones. And that's why if you look at the map early on, where you see Eudora, there is a lot more growth than we would have ever projected there prior to that announcement.
Okay.
And so, yeah, we worked on our staff advisor team, city manager's office in Eudora, and we have participation from the Lawrence Douglas County Planning Office, who's in conversations with the Chamber and Economic Development about some of those assumptions. We feel like the assumptions we put in there are probably conservative high for those assumptions. Of course, the conversation I think we're having even as we go on, even this week, is changing about, okay, this is a guess.
That's
right? These are all guesses. There's a lot of assumptions in this model. And we're taking our best guess and looking at, and then we're going to develop a couple more scenarios too, based on what we're seeing. And you can tell probably from how Mark talks, we're like, a lot of these things, it's like, we realized this, or we asked this, and we're starting to see stuff as you see output, it adds more questions to the list, right? Is why is this way? Why is this segment showing as this? And then it's like, oh, well, this is coded this way, or this is this, and understanding how those trips decisions are being made in the model allows to, you could see in the numbers of runs, he's over 146 runs. So Mark has done his due diligence in working with us to continue to evolve and make those changes so we can feel as confident as we possibly can in the model scenarios that we get. Because this model, the way this model is used in the short term is we have identified on the agenda, you probably saw the list of committed projects. Most of those are already projects that are committed in CIPs or in the state transportation program. This model is hoping to get us out. Okay, that's a really 5-year range, right? So it's in those first near-term bands of the plan. But we're trying to identify issues early on based on the assumptions that we have going on when we do this type of work. What other issues are going to come up? Because some of those are $1 million projects. And you want to get into a situation where those aren't not on your radar, because that model feeds information then. So like the 6th Street conversation, if we recognize that annexations were anticipated for west of 6th Street or west of K10 off of 6th Street, US 40, then the conversation with KDOT needs to be working together with them as part of US 40 to identify what that Western Development Plan says, identify what other corridor planning needs to be done to add capacity, improve safety improvements to that way. And so it drives many of those conversations where in the near term, we may say, oh, there needs to be a future project here. That's what we would identify in the plan. Whether or not it has committed funding or not, we make that determination with staff advisors as we go through the process, right? Based on what we think is available money. But it also allows us to build a list that's called our illustrative list, which is barring available funding, like, when federal resources fall in your lap, these are projects we need to have on our list that we've identified that we need to be planning for or thinking about over the next 5-year range. So when we get to the next plan, we have money committed for some of those projects. And some of that happens through a local process. Some of that happens through a statewide planning process. But this planning allows us to do a lot better job of understanding the assumptions that are being made. We're kind of in a bad timing in the sense that, we do this every 5 years, which means we're going to adopt this plan in 3.5 years. We're going to start again and do this again. And the assumptions may have changed. And I would say, honestly, probably the assumptions are changing right now as we speak, as we're trying to do this, as the conversation is going on around the land development code update, particularly for City of Lawrence and Douglas County. So for that sense, we're trying to make that adjustment to do the best job we can. Does that mean we may have to amend the plan after we adopt it? Yes, we may have to. There may be many things in the plan that we get to, and there's for some reason, something that we had assumed is wrong, whether or not it warrants us getting funding for it or not, and if we have to redo it versus if we can wait until we do the next plan. We work through those things as we come to them. So hopefully that answered your question.
So the burning question for me is, where do you live?
Me,
Yeah.
Northampton, Massachusetts.
Oh, good old flat Kansas, huh?
Oh, sorry.
Well, western part might be flat, but
Yeah,
Lawrence eastern part is not flat.
no, I knew that from Flint Hills as well, but I just,
Yeah.
I should have known better than just to go with my preconceived notions. Sorry.
Well, David here, I think this is a really impressive and comprehensive analysis. I really thank you for this. One thing I'm curious about is in your scenarios of proposed projects versus, being completed versus not completed. I'm curious, is that a binary presentation, or do you look at different kinds of scenarios of one particular project being approved but others not, and what the push and pull effects are on the rest of the network?
Yeah. Do you want me to answer that, Mark, to start?
Well, I think so. I mean, I just,
Okay.
well, go ahead, Jessica.
Yeah, so it's challenging, right? So the first thing we do is we take the list of the stuff that we feel is committed. And the first part of that is anything that's in the transportation improvement program. So thinking about stuff that we have programmed, it's in a local city or county CIP, it's in their capital improvement plan, which means we're talking short term. We're talking 5 years at the most, in terms of projects in there. And not even all of those have geometric improvements. So there may be a project, but its attributes of the project don't necessarily, if it's being reconstructed, it may not change anything in the model. So there's a limited, out of even that list, there's a limited number of things that impact things in the model. Then I think the next thing is we go to look at the state plan and we see what they've committed to, what they have on their radar in the ICE programming, their Eisenhower transportation plan. And we say, okay, how many of these things are reasonable? Where are they going to happen? Were they reasonably enough committed? And we make assumptions about that. The third thing then we do is we looked at the results of the model and we say, oh, well, all this if we don't add any of the private development streets, right? If we don't add any of these streets that we're anticipating would be built with private development, the collectors that support the growth, then all you're going to see here is just the higher level streets that they would feed onto blowing is just in red, right? They're going to be failing capacity because there's not going to be anywhere the trips connecting out of that traffic analysis zone. And so we took, maybe because of that and some of the things we want to see what's actually going to happen to that network to understand more about that area of the model. And if that's where there really is no transportation network, because it's not even annexed to the city now, we went and added the first layer of a base network there. So we can be able to make an assumption about if this development happens, we will at a minimum need this. We just had a conversation with Mark today that's, we showed that first line of collectors, but should we go as far as showing the next line, which is an arterial line in there rather than the next county section road? And so we can do as much of that as we want to show how that trip making distributes on that network. It's a fine balance to try to figure out what your assumptions are going to be. And this we felt like was a happy medium place to be able to say, here's the stuff we think is going to happen. Again, those are planning lines, right? Those roads aren't built yet. There's easements in some of those places. There's protections on the land. We made a line looking at a map based on our best guess, right? And that's what major thoroughfares is. And we use those lines. Could those change? Yes. Will that happen in the development process? Yes. So we're just trying to take a guess at where is enough detail that we can make assumptions about connections so we can be able to tell what's happening on the main part of the network without it just blowing up and not being useful to us. Because if you just put that density there with the population and employment, but without building any network, then the model doesn't give you as much information.
Right.
So it's like this art and science, and hopefully you can tell that as you're listening to Mark and I talk about the work that we've done and see the iterative nature of it is we're trying to continue to keep honing into assumptions and have people say to us, why is this, every time we meet with somebody different and show different people on the staff team, it raises new questions and it allows us to hone in on some of those assumptions to see, does this need to be changed? Is that assumption right? This is what this is showing. Until we get to a place where we feel like this is the best we can do based on our time and the process and the work that we're doing.
Great, thanks. That's super helpful.
That was great.
I don't take the paper, so I get little headlines and snippets of things. Did I see that all the bus lines are going to be free starting?
Fare free starting in 2023. And that, and Mark built his model.
Okay, I wondered about that.
And I believe you said there was a 20%, the model projects a 20% increase in ridership.
Oh, I should have put that one up there too. It breaks it out by individual route as well. But yeah, it's so much of the transit system is oriented to the college, and it really shows up in this too when you take a look at it closely. But
that is already fare free. Anybody who lives on campus already for over a decade has already been not paying a direct fare because they pay a student fee.
Okay.
And so
But the rest of the system.
But the rest of the system isn't, and that it's reflected in the model.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the model is sensitive to those changes in fares, but it also, I only showed that one sort of flow chart of travel passengers on the buses, but when you look at the number of boardings by route, actually, and as predicted by the model, it's really very close. Typically, you don't have these models don't always do that good a job on a route or stop level basis, but this one did terrifically. So yeah, I was pleased with that.
And so about 20% increase, was that?
Yeah, so there are some things that are going to be interesting to see in regards to that because pre-COVID, the entire community had over 3 million rides a year on transit services. So that's paratransit human service providers, our fixed route, KU on Wheels and Lawrence Transit. And they're at like 1.2 million right now. And so they have never, and this is a national trend. This happened in a lot of places. There has not been the recovery post-COVID for transit service. Secondly, we also know locally, KU on Wheels, their portion of the service, they've had to make some pretty significant cuts to frequency. And as soon as you do that, you lose a lot of choice riders and attractiveness. And I think we're seeing some of that. So the assumptions, I think a couple different things are gonna have to happen in relation to that. Fare free will probably change the conversation, the whole reroutes in terms of opening the new hub. I mean, there's a lot of things at play, I think, around assumptions for transit as congestion increases overall, if gas prices change, you know what I mean, in terms of where student densities live in relationship to campus and how service is there in terms of the new route structure, that all of those things are going to kind of come into play in relationship to how that succeeds or doesn't, I think, in the future, getting back to where it was pre-COVID.
Well, I think it's great to have this educated guess as to what's going to happen. Without it, my goodness, then you're really lost. So I thought that was great, even from somebody in Massachusetts.
And speaking of guesses, we're at a period where trying to project 25 years in the future. I'm curious if there are any anticipated changes in technology that you think might affect the overall flow of traffic and the volume of traffic, things like automated vehicles, increased rideshare services, things like that.
Yeah, David, these are reasonable questions. And the other one too is just any sort of measures, regulatory or financial, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Mm-hmm. And then the other one too is it going to be virtual travel patterns? There are a lot of unknowns. Will people no longer travel will all shopping be done on Amazon? And will all visits be done by sending your avatar to a virtual chat room? Federal Highway Administration takes the position that we don't know. Yeah. Therefore, with all these broad sort of more macro level questions, for the purpose of these models and for Federal Highway's perspective, you just have to go with what's there today. Sure. That's for what you present to Federal Highway Administration. However, the model is very sensitive to all these changes. There is a cost per mile for auto use, as you know, and there is a fare, which is fare free, and the full mode choice routine, and all these other characteristics, a number of trip generation rates. These might change if the retail no longer generates the same number of trips that it had in 2019 or earlier. You can test that. So from the local perspective or Douglas County or the MPO, you might want to use the model to go and figure out, well, what would a change in travel patterns be or this new technology? But at least from Federal Highway Administration's perspective, and I guess from KDOT too, okay, give us what you got with the assumption that these big
Sure.
issues remain the same.
Certainly. Yeah, thanks. I mean, even a shift to online shopping doesn't reduce the number of trips that need to be made. It just means they're going the opposite direction. Instead of distributed sources converging on shopping centers, you've basically got distribution centers spreading out their trips to individual dwellings. So
Unless you consider drones.
good point.
There's some technology.
Technology demos of that.
Three-dimensional transportation
Yes.
planning.
Yes.
Right.
It's going to be the Jetsons. Cool. Well, yeah, I don't mean to be too speculative. I was honestly
No.
curious.
Right, no, it's valid, yeah.
Yeah, I have a question about you mentioned early on about the multimodal aspect with bike ped. Where would we expect to see that in the model? I saw the transit, but I didn't see bike ped. And the second part of that question, you mentioned the power of the model in terms of different scenarios in terms of facilities. Is that true of the bike ped network as well?
Well, it can be. I mean, but I looked to see like where there was a distinct, not grade separated bike path, but where there was a dedicated bike path. And there was one in a section of Massachusetts, and then along the old rail line up from Haskell towards the water treatment plant or around up by the river. But I didn't actually put those, and then there are sidewalks all around in different spots too, but I didn't feel that those were sufficient to really induce a lot of new travel on. They were, in many ways, they were sidewalks, that I wasn't sure that was going to make all that much of a difference. So in a lot of that, I didn't go and model. The model does have the mode choice. It does break it out for walking and for bicycle, in addition to auto and transit. But I didn't also have anything to validate it too. I didn't have actual counts in a lot of places to say yes, this is right. So the share of trips that are removed for walking and it actually works out. It is very sensible. It is taking. I looked up at in Lincoln, Nebraska, where the University of Nebraska, and they had a mode choice routine that they used. So I took some of their parameters for transit or for bicycle and pedestrian for us, where there was a major university, and to look at the trip generation rate or the use of bicycles. So I took those information and I calibrated to that. It's when you don't have any particular local data, you got to calibrate to whatever you got. And so that seemed like the best thing I could use. It's not shown here, but it is taken out, and I can go.
It is in there.
There's a separate matrix that shows that those OD paths and can be assigned. But it wasn't part of this presentation. But it does have it accessible.
Thank you.
I thought we had local data on.
Well, we have rough local data that's based on 6 hours of observation for the most part for bike head counts per made into ATA, like annual average daily traffic projections. It's pretty rough. It's not to the level where we would feel like that there's enough of it or it's been validated to a place that we would use it in this regard. And that's hard because the city does have bike head counters now, but the quantity of counts still that have been done and inventoried in a data set that's available to us is very little to none.
Okay.
Jessica, are you thinking that in like, future updates of this plan that we may be in a position to better model those kinds of things, and also as facilities get added to be able to, do
Yes.
something similar to what we saw
Yes.
with the
And
highway.
And I think that's a good example. I mean, we really went big step by adding transit. I mean, we did an extensive amount of work on transit. That's the part we had really identified in. That's where we feel like we're going to get the biggest value in terms of some of the trip BMT reductions particularly in relationship to the university. And that's what we had written into the scope of the work. So the bike ped stuff is just kind of like Mark's doing his due diligence to help us in that regard. But I think you're right. And the thing about that is, besides really having, the 5-year bike ped CIP, there's still a very low percentage of connected bikeways that there is small in that regard for trip making. And so I absolutely think that. But I also think, we haven't talked a lot about what we think besides, there's only a few places where we feel like besides committed projects, we'll be identifying some stuff that's beside assumptions for roadway projects. And so what I take from the model when I look at it is the overall increasing failure of some of the arterial networks, right? As we increase density or we increase vehicle miles traveled, some of those roadways are all going to start to increase some of their delay. And so what that's going to mean in terms of the system is our ability to program for ITS, intelligent transportation systems, about fine tuning intersection operations and travel in those corridors. Maybe that's other intersection improvements. I think that lends itself very well to thinking about travel demand management and pushing our story about multimodal and in that sort of trip making. One of the things I think will be interesting to see as we talk to Mark about an option that's a land use scenario in relationship to something more dense inside of the K10. That means you're also densifying the percentage of households that have access to transit. And so we will be able to share some of those results in a way that tells a story, I think, that's very compelling the next time transit goes out for a sales tax renewal or we're having conversations about land use where we can show some scenarios that can give us some data comparison to show what the reality of those different choices are in our community. And we're at the very beginning of that. And I think each time we do this, we will continue to make incremental steps to get better at that. If we talk about like a full transit service level model, I mean, I could talk to some other communities who do transit modeling and they have $250,000 transit models. That's just it, just for transit. And we're not even talking about that for all the modes. And so it just depends how much investment you need to make and how big your region is and how many, what your capacity is to be able to do that work and use that in decision making.
Mhm. Okay, thanks.
I have a question, and this may be too micro level for this type of planning, but I think and this is Lawrence, I think some of the real congestion happens around elementary and high schools when kids are being dropped off and picked up after school. And some of that I know as a school district, there's a rule that there's fairly long walks across some busy streets. But is there any way to look at that? And I know that will probably shift from the east side to the west if any more schools are closed. But is there any way to look at that issue and use of public transit? Or I know it's a personal decision too to drop kids off, but boy, some of the congestion around town for a very brief time is pretty.
That's a really great question, Dot, and Mark has asked us that. What assumptions do we need to make about what's happening with public schools? And I'm like, I don't know. They're in the process, but I don't know enough about what we could project is happening as part of that to be able to do that as a scenario. I feel like if we engage with them in that conversation and that was a reality of their process, then yes, absolutely, this tool could be help maybe in that decision making or understand the implications of those decisions and the impact of that. The timing hasn't lined up I mean, that type of coordination, I don't know that has ever happened, but Mark, maybe you have something to say in
Yeah,
regards
I
to
mean,
that.
I can mention too that all the elementary schools, middle schools and high schools are in the model. And that's just not just the public schools, but there's an academy out on Wakarusa. There's another one too, a couple of the private schools there as well.
Yep.
And I've got the enrollment in each of those. So it models both the staff that's working there, as well as the function of the travel patterns of the students who are there. But it uses some assumptions there. It's also for each of those schools, I assumed that it was done sort of just that it wasn't done across town, that you had people were assigned to the elementary school that was closest to where they were. When you're down in like Baldwin City, it gets into a much broader county. So it may be that there was no, actually those guys go up to Lecompton. I didn't really, or they, how to break out the county there, maybe, but the districts, it may not be quite precise. But then it's also, and then there are some assumptions about how many of the high schoolers are taking the bus, how many of them are driving their own cars and parking. So these assumptions are in the model. But it was done, with some general assumptions. And then it's also the time, the arrival time and the departure time. So I'm not sure if all the schools in the county have the same arrival and departure times, beginning of school and end of school for the students.
Mhm.
But it's in there with those factors are in there in the hourly model. When you break it down to an hourly number, it says that, okay, we're going to have 1,500 people going to, Lawrence, Lawrence Free High School, or whatever, I'm just making up a number right now, but it says that, okay, and we have 72% of them show up between 7 and 8, or 16% between 8 and 9. I'm just making it up. And then between 3 and 4, you have, 71% go back. These are based on sort of small metropolitan area parameters. So if there's some room to change those, we could do it. But again, it's still working with some averages and generalizations over the course of that full hour. If it turns out that, you have a particular crowd that shows up on one road and they all line up over here and they're blocking the intersection, before it, or the turnaround for the school buses, that's going to be a little bit more micro level than these types of general models can handle.
Thank you.
Okay. If we have no more questions for Mark, we'll let you go. We have a few other things we just want to share with you on the agenda this evening in preparation for some of our next steps that we're working on. Nothing else for Mark?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Much appreciated.
All right. Well, my pleasure. And again, I'll be continuing to work with Jessica and Kyle and others. So if there as more scenarios come up, we can just use them to test them with the model. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you.
See you later.
Seems like 442 different areas.
Yes,
Broken
traffic
into-
analysis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My goodness, that just seems.
Yeah. Well, the model's doing a lot of work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a Herculean effort without this, my goodness.
I mean, you can tell this is what Mark does.
Yeah.
This is his expertise. This is what he does. It's been really fun to get to work with him and hear all of his thought process about ideas and impact and data we need and all of this. And it's been very different than the last time we did our model update too. So we've been very pleased with that. And hopefully we'll have some time to finalize some of the stuff that we just found out today and yesterday to be able to get some scenarios out, because one of the other stuff we're going to show you quickly on the agenda.
And how easy is it to change that? So the thing that you're going to find out tomorrow.
Yeah, so I already got him started working on some of that based on rumor that we heard of what's happening. And so he will have to go in and he's doing some research to shift and adjust some of those numbers that we put into those traffic analysis zones related to population. So he'll be subtracting some over here, adding it to distributing it in these areas based on zoning or conversation about how much zoning density might increase overall. Do you know what I mean?
We're talking a week for him to change?
Oh, no, he'll do it
month or a
tomorrow.
Day or?
No, he's gonna have to do it tomorrow and
Okay.
Friday. Like
Okay.
we'll get out, because I think the model takes like 15 minutes to run.
Oh,
So once he does, it takes a little bit, probably an hour or two or three, to do some of those things in the table that you put into the model, but then the model takes 15 minutes to run. Yeah.
okay.
So each of those things he's kind of,
Okay.
each iteration he's talking
Good.
about running is all of these list of things change. Okay, here's now our next kind of update to figure that out. So he's been very responsive for us. So I anticipate, he promised me we'll have whatever we want to do in this assumption by Friday so we can get it posted for public comment. So I'm like, thank you.
Great.
Thank you. So, okay. So that was the bulk of what we intended for our conversation. We have again put on here the boards. Almost all of this is stuff that you will have seen. Is there interest in looking at this? Let's open it. Because this is the content. The rest is really, I'm going to skim through it kind of quickly though, because we talked a little bit about, this is how we're going. So our plan is to go back out to the public. We generally have a second phase of public engagement. This is the time we're presenting as much draft information as we can to them, in a sense. This is not the same level of engagement we get in the first phase of engagement. This will be 5 to 10% probably numbers wise in terms of, so if we had 700 responses before, we're talking 35 to 70 people responding at this point in the process. That's pretty typical. So
Okay.
just to set our expectations. This obviously isn't ideal. We're going to start a public comment period on Monday and end it on the 23rd, right before Christmas. So 2 weeks. That's important because that gives us time to look at that over the weeks between the holidays and have a final draft of the plan out on January 12th on the MPO Policy Board agenda for the MPO Policy Board to release for a 30-day public comment period, which is what we need to have happen before we can ask the TAC and the MPO Policy Board and you and this body in March to consider adoption and recommend final recommendation. So we got backed into a timeline that's pretty tight. And admittedly, that's not the most desirable thing that I would want. It is what it is. We're going to do it. So this boards, we're planning for one in-person open house and some virtual open houses. And then we will also have an online survey and we'll do some distribution press releases and social media content to make sure we can share that in the ways that we shared it before with our stakeholder groups, with all of the people who signed up to say they wanted to be notified of the process, the hundreds of people on our email listservs, that sort of thing. This is probably we're doing less tabling. So this is going to be less people that have probably been, if they're commenting at this point, it's probably because they were already engaged in the earlier part of the process. There's probably very few people we'll be talking to that haven't been engaged in the process yet. It's possible we could. So we're telling them a little bit about what this is. We're sharing information about what we heard from the first part of the survey. And so at our in-person events too, we'll post links to the public engagement summaries. So people can spend as much time with it as they want, but we'll make sure we give them the most direct information they need to be able to respond to the things very specifically we're going to ask in terms of questions. Here's the goals, objectives, and strategies formatted a little bit differently with the modifications based on the conversations we had at the last meeting. And these look, really lovely. We're going to share things from the existing conditions report at a really high system level. So pedestrian plan for Lawrence and the cities.
Quick question right there on J.
Yes.
It looks to me like the symbols, the pie charts, don't reflect the actual numbers. So you've got 42%.
Probably do not anymore. We can fix that.
Okay, great,
That's
great.
good. Okay.
Great.
I think we updated text on an old board, and so I think you're probably right.
Very good. Thank you.
Yes. That's probably true for these two. Okay. So we're sharing things about the existing plan, level of comfort for the city model that we have. Here's the transit ridership I was talking about earlier. Here's information about headways. Here's existing transit service. Here's definitions of all of the street classifications so people can see what we're proposing in terms of major thoroughfares assumptions for street network and changes. This we talked about at our last meeting. And then here's where we're going to add the stuff that we're working on with Mark around wherever we get to with our scenarios for population. There may be a couple employment and population scenarios here based on our current conversation. And then some of those modeling results as we can present them and asking people to kind of respond to that in relationship to the existing projects list and where we're at. It's a pretty high level survey in general. If you look at the survey link, we're asking people, do the goals and objectives meet what we heard, some of what we heard to address the transportation needs? Or is there anything missing? Do you have comments on major thoroughfares? And is there anything else you'd like to tell us about the information that we presented to you that we should consider? And then we have some demographic questions, but that's kind of what we have planned for this part of the project. And again, we will have the formal 30-day public comment period. This is a lot of content though. I mean, we will be putting out over 250 pages of content. But the benefit of that is we can put it out now as a draft. Some people may comment in this 2-week period. We'll make some of those adjustments that we need to based on this. We'll finalize it and keep working through it. And we posted drafts earlier this time than we ever have before for like the existing conditions and some of the public engagement summaries, because we realize the end process is going to be a very short timeline. And so the sooner we can get some of those drafts out, it gives people a chance to look at most of the content where, probably 75% at least of the content is not going to change in relationship to the work. Because like existing conditions, some of it's just, like we're finalizing crash data or some of that stuff, but some of that stuff, it's existing plans. So it's not intended to change before we adopt the final plan. The one thing I will point out is this is the thing you maybe haven't seen, but it's based on the financial chapter we previously had given you. We kind of want to give the public an idea about what do different things cost as we talk about how much money we anticipate having in our region. At a high level, we wanted to show you this because I think this is going to speak to some of the changes that we've experienced. That from T2040 and our projections based on that previous plan, we had a 2% investment level for non-motorized, so bicycle and pedestrian projects. These projections are based on 5-year historical numbers. And so we're looking at over the life of the plan based on all of those assumptions that we assume that we're at, based on the 5-year historical numbers, we're at closer to a 6% investment for bike ped based on overall total value. And this does not include, this is only standalone bike projects. So this does not include if the roadway is reconstructed and a part of that is sidewalk or shared use path or something. We don't have that called out on this high level of a regional plan. But this is also just kind of really informational as we talk about the future of transportation to show people what that means based on what we have done in the last 5 years to get where we need to go in terms of that. So any thoughts or questions about that? I kind of explained the draft survey. I'm happy to hear what you may have to say about that.
What is the timeline again? Just roughly?
Yeah, so the anticipated timeline we're planning on right now is the public comment period from December 12th through the 23rd. Mm-hmm. That would leave us basically from Christmas to January 12th to finalize the plan. So summarize the rest of the public comment and get the remaining chapters written related to projects and the strategies section developed. And we'll release on January 12th to the MPO policy, to TAC in February, and MPO policy board will have some times where we'll be releasing a draft plan, asking for approval to release for a 30-day public comment period. So we'll be scheduling another meeting with this body to have another opportunity, I hope, in there somewhere in a really tight timeline to get any final feedback you may have before that 30-day public comment period. And then we'll have that out, we'll collect our comments, and we'll have a very quick timeline before we have to get it on the March agenda cycles to collect that feedback, share it again with you, meet with you, get your final feedback, go to TAC and appeal policy board in March. This plan, in order to adopt this plan before the current plan expires, it needs to be adopted in March. And so the caveat to that, if we do not do that, is that it freezes all of the federal transportation funding in our region.
Oh.
So unlike many of the other things, we don't want to be in that situation. That's why we're back into that kind of timeline. And we believe we can do that on schedule.
Good.
You'll just have to bear with us if all the photos or all the format, all the pretty stuff doesn't look exactly how we want it to. I'll just say that now. But we're gonna do our best and we feel we'll be working on it. Or I should say, I'll be working.
That's what I was going to say. The information that I learned a little earlier in the meeting says Paul might have his time taken up with something else, which would be what, Paul?
A newborn in a
Oh my
On the
gosh,
23rd,
congratulations.
give or take a
on the
couple weeks.
23rd.
So. Yes,
That might become somewhat of a priority in your life.
Lately. priority.
we've planned for that, so he will get his time with his family and we will be here working and then.
Wow. That's the royal we, considering it's singular first person.
Right.
Yes and no.
Okay.
I believe I'll have help. It's not gonna be me by myself doing
Yeah.
this, so. I'm not worried about that. Okay, the other things we've included on the agenda for your consideration is just the reference documents that we've continued to have. We had updated for you, chapter 2 draft, so you've maybe seen some changes to that, added some air quality and electric vehicle stuff, content to that draft and our other summaries, and that's just for your, I'm gonna keep giving you that, so you have that, so it's not all new content when you see the bulk of the plan. Those are the biggest portions probably of the plan, quantity page wise, and so that should give you a really good indication where we're at in that, besides the stuff we haven't added. The other parts of the plan are less in terms of page volume, so you have probably seen most of the volume of the plan, although we're to the point now of, some of the content, working through all that. So that's where we'll be, and we will expect to talk to you likely in January.
Super.
If you're looking for things and you see anything between now and then, please feel free to email me. But we will have a lot more eyes on stuff, so recognize stuff is still. We just keep working through it, so.
Fantastic.
I will say, I was surprised that 9,800 people, the projection is 9,800 people are going to be added in the city of Lawrence and 20,000 and some in the unincorporated areas.
Well, I think that includes Eudora. So I think he has Lawrence and then he has Douglas County, which is everything else except for Lawrence.
Okay,
So I would
Eudora,
say
Baldwin
it's,
City, Lecompton.
and so it's Baldwin City, Lecompton,
Okay.
Eudora, but the majority of that's Eudora.
yeah,
So when we pull the final numbers, we will separate that
Okay.
out. But Mark didn't do that.
Okay.
He's looking at the urban area of Lawrence, which is why we have the MPO, and he's showing you that, and then he's showing you what else is outside of that. Don't read too much into that yet.
okay.
Okay. Because if you looked at those dots from the. Just a second, and then I'll share the screen so that we. So if you look at that, you see most of that's here, but if you look in the county,
Yeah,
so
Right.
right now, these population. This would likely, if this happens, I would assume be annexed. It's in some growth tiers, right? And so right now, all of this that's like outside of the existing city of Lawrence limits is being showed as in county.
okay.
And we had that conversation with Mark. But what we need to do is, based on those assumptions, need to go back and draw whatever we think the new
Lines,
lines would look like to run those queries. And likewise, all of this is
Right.
in that Douglas County number. So I'm going to tell you, if you look at these these numbers and changes, so this big circle is 5,000 representatives, it's 0, so it's like 1. You can tell if you think about the rural parts of the county, that's not what, for the most part, that's not what we're looking at. But we'll make sure we
Okay.
update that and be more specific about that. But hopefully you can tell from this, that's where that is. Do you know what I mean? That's where those numbers are.
Super.
great presentation, I would say.
Yes.
I liked
Thank
it.
you.
Very informative.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. there's so much in the model, and so it's really hard to tell what level of detail to get into. And so when he talks about those validation reports and the user reports and all of our backend stuff, we will be trying to determine how do we tell the story that we're telling based on what the data says and showing that. And I imagine we'll have a whole separate series of outputs that we may not even put into the plan besides like, here's the couple scenarios, like in a model user guide that would be in an appendices, like for transit and some of that other stuff in terms of the overall mode split percentages around bike or ped or some of those things. So.
Right.
All right. If there's nothing else, I'll thank you for your time.
No, thank you.
Good work. Thank you.
What happened to your finger?
Thank
Oh,
you.
I cut it on a mandolin.
Honorable way to cut it.
But I have a big bandaged finger. So.
Not the musical instrument, I think. You're talking about the,
Yeah, I was
Oh.
talking about like the slicer.
Oh, well,
That's
that's
my-
me every Thanksgiving.
That's-
It's not
that's-
Thanksgiving if I
that's-
don't cut myself.
I did too.
my daughter threw hers in the
Damn, what were
trash
you
after
doing?
a major incident.
One on.
Anyway,
Facebook today.